Dr. Marcus Thorne leaned against the nurse's station, a smirk playing on his lips as he watched her. Eris Thorne, though they shared a name by coincidence, could not have been more different. Where he was a mountain of a man, all booming voice and expansive gestures, she was a whisper. 5'2" if she stretched. Slender frame, hands that looked too delicate to even hold a pen, let alone the instruments of life and death. "You know, Thorne," he said, his voice carrying across the trauma bay, a deliberate performance for the residents and other nurses. "I've been thinking." Eris continued her methodical check of the crash cart, her movements economical and precise. She didn't look at him. "A dangerous pastime, Doctor." A few of the junior residents snickered. Marcus's smirk widened. "I think you're in the wrong department," he continued, pushing off the counter and sauntering over. He loomed over her, a solar eclipse in blue scrubs. "You're built for pediatrics, all tiny and quiet. You could hold their little hands, tell them stories. This," he gestured vaguely at the organized chaos of the emergency department, "is a place for grown-ups, for people with presence." The insult hung in the air, thick and greasy. She finally looked up, her eyes a flat, unreadable gray. They held his gaze for a beat longer than was comfortable. There was no anger in them, no fear, nothing. It was like looking into a deep, still lake. "I'm where I need to be," she said, her voice soft, but not weak. "Are you?" he scoffed. "Look at you. If we get a real multi-car pileup, a real GSW with an aortic transection, you'll be trampled, swept away. We need people who can crack a chest, not whisper a patient to sleep." He turned to his audience. "Am I right? This is the big leagues." Nervous agreement rippled through the staff. They all depended on Marcus Thorne. He was the chief of trauma surgery, a god in this small kingdom of blood and bone. His word was law, and his favorite pastime was reminding everyone of it. Eris simply turned back to her cart. The defibrillator paddles were clean. The epinephrine vials were all accounted for. The laryngoscope blades were properly seated. Her world was one of order, one of preparation. His words were just noise, the meaningless static of a world she had left behind. A world she was forced to forget. The overhead speakers crackled to life, a jarring burst of sound. "Code 3, rooftop helipad, ETA, 2 minutes. Multiple GSWs, blast injuries. Mascal protocol initiated." The casual atmosphere evaporated. Marcus Thorne was instantly in motion, his arrogance transforming into a focused, kinetic energy. "All right, people, you heard it. Trauma 1 and 2, now. Let's move." He spared one last glance for Eris. "Try to keep up, little bird. Or better yet, go make some coffee." He didn't see the flicker in her eyes. A ghost of a memory. Blast injuries. Multiple GSWs. The words were a key turning a lock deep inside her, opening a door to a room filled with the smell of sand, iron, and cordite. She finished her checklist, her hands moving with an unnerving calm. She was already miles ahead of them. She knew what was coming. She could feel it in the marrow of her bones. The thudding of rotor blades grew from a distant pulse to a building-shaking roar. It was a sound she knew better than her own heartbeat. A Black Hawk. Not a civilian medevac. A military bird. That was the first thing that was wrong. The elevator doors dinged open, and the chaos spilled into the hallway. 2 gurneys, surrounded by a phalanx of men who did not look like paramedics. They were dressed in tactical gear, their faces grim, weapons held at a low ready. They moved with a predatory grace that was utterly alien to the sterile, brightly lit hospital corridors. Dr. Thorne met them at the entrance to the trauma bay, his usual bluster momentarily checked by the sheer intensity of the arrivals. "I'm Dr. Thorne, Chief of Trauma. What do we have?" The man in the lead, a master chief with salt and pepper hair, and eyes that had seen too much didn't break stride. We have two critical. Commander Evans has multiple GSWs to the chest and abdomen, penetrating blast trauma to the lower extremities. He's lost a lot of blood. The other is Lieutenant Miller, shrapnel wounds, stable for now. Evans is the priority. Right, Marcus said, regaining his footing. Get him into Trauma 1. Let's get a line in. Start the massive transfusion protocol. I want X-rays, fast scan, and page vascular. Now! The team swarmed around the gurney, a flurry of activity. Aris stood near the doorway, an island of stillness in the storm. Her eyes were fixed on the man on the gurney. Commander Evans. His face was pale, beaded with sweat, his breathing shallow and rapid. A field dressing, soaked crimson, was taped crudely to his chest. Military grade. She recognized the wrapping technique. She recognized the specific type of hemorrhagic staining consistent with a high-velocity rifle round. She recognized the man. Her blood ran cold. It was Jake Evans, the man who had pulled her out of a burning Humvee in the Korengal Valley, the man whose legs she had pieced back together on a dusty floor while RPGs rained down around them. The Master Chief scanned the room, his gaze sweeping over the doctors and nurses, dismissing them all. His eyes were searching, hunting. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice a low growl that cut through the medical jargon. Marcus Thorne frowned, distracted from his patient. "Where is who?" "We have the best trauma team on the coast right here." "We weren't sent for the team," the SEAL said, his eyes finally landing on Aris. They locked onto her, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than cold professionalism crossed his face. Relief. "We were sent for her." He pointed a gloved finger. "We need Ghost." The entire trauma bay went silent. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes followed the SEAL's finger to the small, quiet nurse standing by the crash cart, the one Marcus Thorne had just told to go make coffee. Marcus stared, his mouth slightly agape. "Her? You mean Nurse Thorne? She's a nurse." The Master Chief walked directly to Aris, ignoring everyone else. He stood before her, his posture respectful, almost reverent. "Ma'am, it's Commander Evans. He's bad. They said you were here." On the gurney, Jake's eyes fluttered open. His gaze, hazy with pain and shock, found her. A weak, bloody smile touched his lips. "Ghost," he rasped, the word barely a breath. "Knew they'd find you." Then his eyes rolled back, and the monitor above his head screamed a single piercing tone. Ventricular fibrillation. Cardiac arrest. "He's coding," a resident yelled. "Get the paddles. Charge to 200, Marcus bellowed, shoving his way to the bedside. "Push one of Epi." Aris moved. It wasn't a walk, it was a glide, a shift in physics. One moment she was by the cart, the next she was at the head of the bed. Her entire demeanor had changed. The quiet, reserved nurse was gone. In her place was something else, something cold, hard, and absolutely in command. "Stop," she said. Her voice was still quiet, but it sliced through the panic with the edge of a scalpel. Marcus Thorne froze, paddles in hand. "What?" "He's in V-fib!" "You shock him now. You'll kill him," she said, her eyes not on Marcus, but scanning the monitors, the patient, the readouts, absorbing a dozen data points in a single second. "It's not a primary cardiac event. He's bled out. This is PEA arrest masquerading as V-fib from an empty heart. You're trying to start a car with no gas." She looked at the resident holding the epinephrine. "Don't push that. It'll just clamp down his empty vessels and make it worse." She turned her gaze on Marcus Thorne, and for the first time, he felt like the junior in the room. He felt small. "He has a tension pneumothorax and cardiac tamponade from a penetrating chest wound. His heart is being crushed and his lung is collapsed. That's why he arrested." It wasn't a diagnosis. It was a statement of fact. How can you possibly know that without a scan? Marcus challenged, his authority crumbling. Because I put my finger in the hole that caused it 2 years ago in Kandahar, she replied without blinking. I know his anatomy, and I know this injury. She pointed to a young surgeon. You. Get me a 10-blade, a giggly saw, and the biggest clamps you have, and a chest tube kit. She pointed to another nurse. You. Get 4 units of O-neg blood and hook it to a pressure bag. I want it flowing before I make the first cut. They stared at her, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her commands. A nurse giving orders to surgeons. The Master Chief stepped forward, his hand resting on the butt of his sidearm. You heard her. Move. That broke the spell. The team scrambled into action. Marcus Thorne just stood there, paddles hanging uselessly at his side. What are you doing? You can't just crack his chest in the middle of the ER. We have protocols. We need to get him to an OR. Eris was already pulling on gloves, her movements a blur of efficiency. The OR is 10 minutes away. He has 60 seconds, maybe less. She took the scalpel from the trembling hand of the resident. She looked directly into Marcus's eyes. The still lake was gone. Now it was a storm. Your protocols are for patients who have the luxury of time. He doesn't. You can either help me save his life, or you can get out of my way. My God, I'm back here again. The blood, the noise, the clock that only ticks down. I ran from this. I buried this person. And now, here she is. Here I am. There is no choice. There never was. When the bell rings, you answer. The choice was not a choice. It was an imperative. Marcus swallowed, his pride warring with the undeniable certainty radiating from this woman. He saw the flat line on the monitor. He saw the SEALs standing guard, their expressions making it clear there was only one correct course of action. He saw the life draining out of the man on the table. He put the paddles down. What do you need? He asked, his voice humbled. Retractors, and keep the blood coming. She turned to the patient. Hang on, Jake, she whispered, a promise between soldiers. Then, with a steady hand, she made a long, sweeping incision from his sternum to his back, following the line of the 4th intercostal space, an emergency thoracotomy, in the middle of the trauma bay. The room held its breath. They weren't just watching a procedure. They were watching a ghost come back to life. The air thickened, charged with a mixture of disbelief and adrenaline. Dr. Thorne, a man who commanded every room he entered, now stood as a subordinate, holding a rib retractor, his knuckles white. He was watching a nurse perform one of the most high-risk, Hail Mary procedures in emergency medicine, and she was doing it with the calm focus of someone buttering toast. Rib spreaders, Aris commanded, not looking up from her work. Someone slapped the instrument into her waiting hand. She inserted the tips into the space she'd created between the ribs and cranked the handle. There was a sickening series of cracks as cartilage and bone gave way, opening the man's chest cavity like a book. A torrent of dark, non-clotting blood and air hissed out, splashing onto the floor. There's the tension pneumo, she stated, her voice a clinical monotone. Lung is down. Her gloved hand disappeared into the cavern of Jake's chest. The residents and junior nurses gasped. Her entire forearm was inside him. Her fingers moved with a surgeon's delicate precision, yet with a soldier's grim purpose. They weren't just feeling. They were seeing. Mapping the landscape of trauma by touch. Pericardium is tense. It's full of blood. Tamponade confirmed. Her eyes flicked to the monitor. The flat line remained. He's still empty. She looked at the nurse with the blood bags. Squeeze those bags. I want that blood in him, not next to him. The nurse, startled, began applying pressure, forcing the cold O-negative blood through the IV line and into Jake's veins. Scissors, Aris ordered. She incised the pericardial sac, the fibrous bag surrounding the heart. More dark blood spilled out, releasing the pressure on the cardiac muscle. And there it was, his heart, still, flaccid. Still no output, a resident murmured, his voice filled with a sense of impending doom. Aris ignored him. She wrapped her hand around the motionless heart, her thumb on the right ventricle, her fingers on the left. She began to squeeze, rhythmically, firmly. 1, 2, 3, 4. She was manually pumping his heart, forcing the new blood through his body, into his brain, into his lungs. She was the engine of his life. "I have a myocardial laceration," she announced, her fingers detecting a tear in the muscle wall. "Left ventricle. Looks like a bony fragment from a rib. It's small, but it's why he bled into the sac." She looked at Marcus. "I need a 3-0 proline suture on a cardiovascular needle, and I need you to cross-clamp his aorta, now." Marcus stared at her, his mind struggling to keep up. Cross-clamping the descending aorta in the chest was a move of pure desperation. It stopped all blood flow to the lower body, redirecting every last drop of pressure to the heart and brain. It was a maneuver that bought minutes, but cost organs. His kidneys, his spine, Marcus began, the litany of risks playing through his head. "His kidneys and spine are already dead if his brain is," Aris shot back, her voice like cracking ice. "Clamp it, doctor, or I will." Galvanized, Marcus reached into the chest cavity with a long clamp. He was a skilled surgeon, but this was a world away from the sterile, controlled environment of the OR. Guided by her instructions, he located the thick, rubbery tube of the descending aorta against the spine and clamped it shut. "Aortic cross-clamp is on," he confirmed, his own voice sounding foreign to him. "Good." Aris took the suture needle. Her other hand was still pumping his heart, a steady, life-giving rhythm. With her free hand, she began to stitch the hole in his heart muscle. It was an act of impossible dexterity, like trying to sew a tear in a wet paper bag, in the dark, during an earthquake. 1 stitch, 2. The monitor beeped, a single hopeful spike, then another. A ragged, weak rhythm appeared on the screen. Sinus tachycardia. Fast, but it was his. "We have a rhythm!" a nurse cried out. "It won't last if we don't fill the tank," Aris said, her focus absolute. "Keep that blood coming. I need 2 more units on deck." She tied off the suture with a surgeon's knot. "Suture is in. Laceration is closed." She continued the cardiac massage for a few more beats, feeling the heart muscle begin to contract on its own, weakly at first, then with more conviction. It was fighting back. "Okay," she breathed. "It's beating on its own. I'm taking my hand out." She slowly withdrew her hand from his chest. The heart, now visible to everyone, continued its frantic, desperate rhythm. It was alive. A collective sigh of relief went through the room. It was a miracle. They had witnessed a resurrection. "Don't celebrate yet," Aris warned, her work far from over. "Let's release the cross-clamp. Do it slowly. We're going to get a massive reperfusion washout of lactate and potassium. He might arrest again." Marcus carefully, slowly, released the clamp on the aorta. The patient's blood pressure, which had climbed to a fragile 70 systolic, immediately plummeted as blood rushed back into his oxygen-starved lower body. The heart monitor squawked again, the rhythm deteriorating. "He's throwing PVCs," a resident said nervously. "Give him 100 of lidocaine," Aris commanded instantly, "and a gram of calcium chloride. Counter the hyperkalemia." The drugs went in. The chaotic rhythm on the monitor wavered, fought, and then stabilized again into a fast but organized beat. His blood pressure crept back up, 80/40, then 90/50. He was alive. He was stabilized. Aris finally took a step back from the table. She stripped off her bloody gloves, her movements weary. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its place. She looked at the organized carnage, the open chest, the tubes and wires, the man who was alive only because she had refused to let him die. The entire room was staring at her. Awe, shock, utter disbelief. The SEALs stood by the wall, their expressions unreadable, but their posture was one of profound respect. Dr. Marcus Thorne looked from the stable patient to the petite woman who had just run the most incredible code he had ever seen. He looked at her hands, the ones he had called too delicate. They were stained with the blood of the man she had just pulled back from the brink of death. He felt a wave of shame so profound, it almost buckled his knees. He walked over to her, his movements stiff. He started, his voice cracking. I don't know what to say. Eris looked at him, her gray eyes holding a deep, ancient weariness. Just get him to the OR. He needs a formal repair, his chest closed, and his leg injuries debrided. He's stable for transport, for now. Of course, Marcus said, nodding dumbly. He turned to the team, his voice regaining a sliver of its old authority, but now tempered with a new humility. You heard her. Let's get him prepped for transfer. Let's go, people. As the team bustled to move Commander Evans, Marcus turned back to Oris. He looked her straight in the eye. Thank you, he said. It wasn't just for the patient. It was an apology, an admission, a surrender. I was wrong, about everything. Oris gave a single, tired nod. Vindication was a hollow prize. It didn't erase the past. It didn't quiet the ghosts. The Master Chief approached her as the gurney was wheeled out. He's going to make it, he said. It was a statement, not a question. He's a fighter, Oris replied, her voice distant. He is, the SEAL agreed. But he needed you, Ghost. We all did. He paused, his expression turning serious. They know you're here now. Using that particular aortic clamp technique. It's like a signature. It just lit up a database somewhere. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over her. Who knows? He knows, the Master Chief said. And she knew exactly who he was. Colonel Vance. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. Hours later, the hospital had settled into the quiet hum of the early morning. Commander Jake Evans was out of surgery, stable in the ICU. The SEAL team had melted away, leaving only 2 stoic guards outside his room. The rest of the staff spoke in hushed tones, stealing glances at Oris whenever she passed. The story of the quiet nurse who had cracked a man's chest and held his heart in her hand had already become legend. Oris was in a small, sterile supply closet, restocking saline bags. She needed the mindless, repetitive task. She needed the silence, but the silence was loud. It was filled with the echoes of rotor blades and monitor alarms, and a name she had tried to bury for 3 years. The door opened behind her. It was Marcus Thorne. He had changed out of his bloody scrubs. He held 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to her. She hesitated, then took it. I looked you up, he said, leaning against a shelf of gauze. Or I tried to. Iris Thorne, registered nurse, graduated top of her class, worked 1 year in a rural clinic in Montana, then here. That's it. It's like you didn't exist before that. Iris stared into her coffee cup. Some people prefer it that way. The SEALs called you Ghost, Marcus pressed gently. And ma'am. They don't call nurses ma'am like that. They called you a doctor, a surgeon. She remained silent. That wasn't just some field medicine you did tonight, he continued, his voice full of a surgeon's analytical respect. That was a damage control thoracotomy with internal cardiac massage and a supraceliac aortic cross clamp. Those are Tier 1 Special Forces surgical procedures, the kind of thing they do in a black site, not a county hospital. The kind of thing that has a 30% success rate in the best of hands. And you did it like you were changing a tire. He took a sip of his coffee. So, I'm going to ask you, doctor to doctor. Who are you? Who am I? I am the sum of my scars. I am the silence after the explosion. I am the one who stayed behind to count the dead. I am a name whispered in the dark, a story they tell to scare new recruits. I am the one who failed. She finally looked at him, the carefully constructed walls of her anonymity crumbling. My name is Dr. Aris Thorne. I was a major in the United States Army. Forward Surgical Team Commander, attached to Joint Special Operations Command. My call sign was Ghost. The confession hung in the small room. Marcus absorbed the information, the pieces clicking into place, the authority, the skill, the haunted look in her eyes. JSOC, he breathed. That's Delta, SEAL Team 6, the top of the pyramid. You weren't just a combat surgeon. You were one of them. I was, she said, the past tense a heavy weight. Why are you here? He asked, the question genuine, devoid of his earlier mockery. Why are you working as a nurse, hiding your skills? A surgeon like you. You could be running the department at Johns Hopkins, at the Mayo Clinic. Why this? Because of Operation Nightingale. The memory slammed into her, as violent and unexpected as an IED. The heat, the dust, the screaming. Not just the screaming of the wounded, but her own. She had been the lead surgeon, a mass casualty event in a remote village, a friendly fire incident. American soldiers, local allies, women, children, all torn apart by an errant drone strike. Her surgical tent was overwhelmed in minutes. She worked for 36 hours straight, 36 hours of blood and failure. For every life she saved, she felt 3 slip through her fingers. She made choices, horrible, necessary choices. Black tagging a child to save a soldier who had a better chance, sacrificing 1 to save 3. The brutal arithmetic of combat triage. At the end of it, when there was no one left to save, Colonel Vance had stood over her, his uniform immaculate, his face a mask of disappointment. You lost 12, he had said. Not, we lost, but you lost. There wasn't enough blood, she had whispered, her hands shaking, her body ready to collapse. Not enough time. A proper commander makes time, he had replied, his voice cold. A proper commander finds a way. This report will reflect your failure to manage the situation, Major. Your sentimentality cost lives. He had made her the scapegoat. The official inquiry was a sham. She was cleared of wrongdoing, but the stain remained. Whispers followed her. They said she had cracked under pressure. They said the ghost had lost her nerve. The guilt, layered with the betrayal, was a poison. She couldn't look at a uniform without feeling Vance's judgment. She couldn't step into an OR without seeing the faces of the ones she couldn't save. So she ran. She disappeared. She buried the surgeon and became a nurse. She traded the scalpel for a bedpan. She chose anonymity over excellence because excellence had cost her everything. I made a mistake, she told Marcus, the lie a practiced, hollow thing. A bad call. People died. I couldn't be that person anymore. Marcus listened, his expression unreadable. He knew there was more to the story. He knew trauma when he saw it. And it wasn't just in the patients she treated. It was in her. The man you saved tonight, Marcus said softly. Commander Evans. He doesn't think you made a mistake. He trusted you with his life. His men trusted you. They came for you. They remembered who I was, she corrected. Not who I am. Is there a difference? The question hung between them. What would you have done in Dr. Thorne's position? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have challenged a system that broke its best people? Before she could answer, his pager buzzed, a shrill intrusion. He glanced at it. It's the hospital administrator. He wants to see us both. Now. A new kind of dread settled in Aris's stomach. The ripple effect of her actions was spreading. The Master Chief's warning echoed in her mind. He knows. The administrator's office was on the top floor, a world of polished wood and panoramic city views, a stark contrast to the grit and reality of the emergency department. Mr. Henderson, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, sat behind a large mahogany desk. He looked worried. Standing by the window, silhouetted against the dawn, was another man. He was in uniform. Army dress blues. A full colonel. He turned as they entered. His face was sharp, predatory, with cold, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. It was Colonel Vance. Aris felt the air leave her lungs. The supply closet, the OR, the entire hospital seemed to fall away. She was back in the desert, covered in blood and dust, with this man standing in judgment over her. Major Thorne, Vance said, his voice a smooth, dangerous purr. Or is it Nurse Thorne now? I must admit I'm disappointed. Hiding your talents in a place like this, it's a terrible waste. Colonel, Aris replied, her voice tight, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. Marcus looked between them, sensing the deep, toxic history. What is this about? He demanded, stepping slightly in front of Aris, a protective gesture that would have been unthinkable just hours ago. Vance's cold eyes flickered to Marcus. This is a military matter, Doctor. It doesn't concern you. It concerns my hospital and my staff, Henderson, the administrator, interjected nervously. Colonel Vance arrived a few minutes ago. He's here to oversee Commander Evans's recovery. Aris knew that was a lie. He wasn't here for Jake. He was here for her. The database had flagged her, and he had come to put his ghost back in her cage. I'm sure the hospital can manage, Aris said, finding her voice. Oh, I have no doubt, Vance said with a thin smile. Especially now that we know you're here. In fact, that's why I'm really here, Aris. I've come to bring you home. I have a home, she said. A nursing station? He scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. You're a weapon, Major. A finely honed instrument of war. And you belong to the United States Army. Your retirement was never officially sanctioned. You've been listed as on extended, unsanctioned leave. I'm here to reactivate you. Reactivate her. The word was a threat, to pull her back into his world under his command, under his control. No, she said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a gunshot. Vance's smile tightened. That wasn't a request. It's an order. We have a new program, Project Chimera. We need a lead surgeon, someone with your unique skills in unconventional trauma intervention. Your work has become legendary. We want to standardize it, weaponize it. He was talking about her life's work, her desperate, life-saving improvisations, as if they were things to be packaged and sold to the highest bidder. My work is about saving lives, not weaponizing them, she retorted. The two are not mutually exclusive in our line of work, as you well know, Vance said smoothly. He took a step closer. Look, Aris, I'm willing to wipe the slate clean. The unfortunate business during Operation Nightingale, we can put that behind us. A fresh start. You can have your own facility, your own team, anything you want. All you have to do is come back. It was a tempting offer, a return to the work she was born to do, a way out of the shadows. But it came at a price. Her soul. She would be his. And if I refuse? She asked. Vance's expression hardened, the mask of civility dropping away. Refusal is not an option. As I said, you are still an active duty officer. Refusing a direct order during a time of conflict is desertion. The court-martial would be swift. You'd spend the next 20 years in Leavenworth. Is that what you want? To trade a nurse's station for a prison cell? He thought he had her trapped. He had always been an expert at creating cages. But something had changed in the last few hours. Holding Jake's heart in her hand, She had remembered what it felt like not to be a ghost. She had remembered what it felt like to fight. "You can't court-martial me for desertion," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Oh, I assure you I can," Vance sneered. "No," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Because to do that, you'd have to open an official inquiry into why I left. And that would mean unsealing the full, unredacted report on Operation Nightingale." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vance's face. Aris pressed her advantage. "Not your sanitized, official version that blamed a field surgeon's emotional breakdown. I mean the real one. The one with the satellite thermal imaging. The one that shows the drone strike wasn't friendly fire. It was a targeted strike on a building that you knew was full of civilians. You called it in." The room went deathly quiet. Henderson and Marcus stared, horrified. "You're delusional," Vance hissed, his composure cracking. "Trauma has clearly affected your memory." "My memory is perfect," Aris countered, her voice ringing with conviction. "I remember the coordinates you gave the drone pilot. I remember you saying, 'Prosecute the target,' even after intelligence reported non-combatants in the area. You were chasing a high-value target, and you didn't care about the collateral damage. And when it went wrong, you buried it. And you tried to bury me with it." She had held on to this for years, a secret she thought she would take to her grave. The real source of her guilt wasn't the patience she had lost. It was her silence, her complicity in his lie. "You have no proof," Vance snarled. "Don't I?" Aris said. "My official report was filed under duress, but I kept a copy of my original notes, and my helmet cam was active for the first 10 minutes of the mass call. The audio feed picked up your direct command. I have it all on a hardened data chip, the one I've kept hidden for 3 years." She was bluffing. Partially. She had the notes, but the helmet cam footage had been confiscated. But he didn't know that. And in his eyes, she saw the sudden, stark terror of a guilty man. "This is blackmail," he seethed. "This is treason." "No," Aris said calmly. "This is a choice. You can walk out of this hospital, and I will continue my unsanctioned leave indefinitely. You will forget my name, you will forget I exist, and Project Chimera will find a new surgeon. Or you can try to force my hand. And if you do, that data chip goes straight to the press. Not the military, not the politicians, the free press. And the whole world will know what happened during Operation Nightingale. Your call, Colonel." It was a standoff. 2 soldiers fighting a war in a quiet, carpeted office, with lives and careers hanging in the balance. Marcus Thorne stepped forward, breaking the silence. "I think the Colonel should go," he said, his voice firm. "He's upsetting my staff, and this hospital does not respond well to threats." Vance looked from Aris's unyielding face to Marcus's protective stance. He was outmaneuvered, beaten. He had come to collect a ghost and found a general. With a look of pure hatred, he straightened his uniform. "This isn't over, Major," he whispered, a final, impotent threat. "Yes, it is," Aris replied. He turned without another word and strode out of the office. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing like a closing chapter. Aris finally let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Her legs felt weak. She leaned against the desk for support. Henderson, the administrator, looked pale but resolute. "Dr. Thorne," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "The one on the table, not the one who just left. Is everything she said true?" "I believe so," Marcus answered for her. Henderson nodded slowly, processing the morning's events. A nurse who was secretly a legendary surgeon. A decorated colonel who was a war criminal. His quiet, orderly hospital had become the stage for a military drama. He looked at Aris, his eyes full of a new, profound respect. "It seems we have been underutilizing your talents, Dr. Thorne," he said with considerable understatement. "Your official status is, of course, a complicated matter. But your place is not as a nurse, not here. Eris felt a pang of disappointment. She thought he was firing her. I agree, Marcus chimed in, a strange, excited gleam in his eye. Her place isn't as a nurse. Her place is running her own department. Henderson and Aris both looked at him. What are you talking about, Marcus? Henderson asked. I'm talking about what I saw last night, Marcus said, his voice filled with passion. I saw a new kind of medicine, fast, efficient, brutally effective, a bridge between the battlefield and the civilian world. We treat soldiers coming home from war. We treat victims of violence. Their injuries are getting more and more like what she's seen for years. He turned to Eris. What you did last night. You shouldn't have to hide that. You should be teaching it. We should be building a program around you. A center for advanced trauma and combat medicine. We can fund it. We have the resources. We can make this the best trauma center in the country, with you leading it. The offer was staggering. It wasn't just a job. It was a purpose, a chance to take the horrors she had seen, the skills she had learned in the crucible of war, and turn them into something that healed, something that lasted. A way to honor the dead by saving the living. She looked from Marcus's earnest face to Henderson's hopeful one. They weren't offering her a cage. They were offering her a command, on her own terms. She thought of the years she had spent in the shadows, haunted by her past. She thought of the feeling of Jake's heart beating in her hand, the visceral reminder of what she was capable of. The ghost was a part of her, but it wasn't all of her. It was time for Dr. Eris Thorne to come home. Okay, she said, a small smile touching her lips for the first time in years. Where do we start? 6 months later, the ribbon was cut on the Thorne Center for Advanced Trauma. The name was Marcus's idea, a small, private joke between them. Dr. Eris Thorne stood at the podium, not in a nurse's scrubs or a soldier's uniform, but in a crisp, white lab coat with her name embroidered over the pocket. Director of Trauma Surgery. Her team, a hand-picked group of the best and brightest, stood behind her. Marcus was beside her, his official title now Deputy Director. He had insisted on it. In the audience, in a wheelchair he was determined to abandon soon, was Commander Jake Evans. He caught her eye and gave her a sharp, proud nod. Eris looked out at the crowd, at the gleaming new facility built on the foundation of her past. She was no longer running. She was building. She had integrated the two halves of her life, the soldier and the healer, the ghost and the doctor. She had faced down the man who tried to break her and had emerged stronger. They had laughed when she walked into trauma, a small woman in a big, scary world. They saw a nurse who belonged in pediatrics. They weren't laughing now. They were watching a leader take command. She was home, and she had work to do.